Sparkies, welcome back to our large group story time. This is week 3 that we've been doing our video lessons. I hope you guys have been enjoying them. I've been hearing back from some of your parents saying that you have, so I'm so glad you're doing that. And I'm glad you're watching them and continuing our story so we can finish up our large group time for this year and be ready for next year to start. So this week, week 3, this is the second to last week of our story. So next week we're going to have one more story. And then the week after that, we're going to do kind of a year summary where we're going to talk about everything we talked about last year and then look ahead a little bit to next year and what we'll be talking about for next year as well. So only 2 more lessons after this. I know it's sad. And then we'll take a break for the summer and then come back in the fall. So today we're picking up again with Israelites. Remember the Israelites? We'll do a quick recap. Israelites were in Egypt and they were slaves. They were not in a good place. And remember, God sent all the plagues, and the Israelites left Egypt, and they went through the Red Sea, and now they're kind of wandering around in this area in the desert. And last week we talked about the 10 Commandments and how God was creating a new country. So God's sending them from Egypt up to this place called Canaan, which today we know as Israel. But back then it was called Canaan, and he's sending them up here to build their own nation, to become their own people and to make their own nation. So last week we talked about some of the laws that God gave them, namely the 10 Commandments. There were a lot more laws. We're not going to talk about those right now, but that's what we talked about last week. And so now we're going to talk about what the Israelites kind of did when they were in the desert. And they were actually in the desert for a very, very long time. I won't tell you quite how long yet, but they were in there for a very long time. So the Israelites are all here in the desert, and remember, there's a lot of people. There are probably close to 1 million people. We don't know how many people there were exactly, but a lot more than you've ever seen in your life. A lot more than in the whole city of Woodland. So there's a lot of people, and they're in the middle of a desert, and what's in a desert? Not much, right? There's not much food, there's not much water. That's why it's a desert. There's not much food or water or anything going on. So we have all these people stuck in the desert, and there's no food, and there's no water. Now, these people have just seen God provide for them through the plagues and through the Red Sea and all those miracles, and you would hope that by now they've learned that God can do anything, right? He's God. He can do anything. If he can save them from the Egyptians and the Red Sea, then he can provide food. But unfortunately, they haven't quite learned their lesson yet. And so the people, rather than going to Moses and saying, hey, it would be great if we could have some food and water, they start complaining. Have you guys ever complained before? I hope not, but I'm pretty sure you have. They start complaining and whining and grumbling and saying, why did God bring us out here? God brought us out here just so we will die. We had food in Egypt. There was lots of food. There was bread. There was meat. And we were well fed in Egypt. We should just go back to Egypt because it's so awful here in the desert. We have no food. We have no water. And we're just going to die. Now, they're partially true. They did have food while they were in Egypt. But remember, they were also slaves. They had no freedom. They had no liberties to do anything. They were working hard for Pharaoh, and that was it. That was their whole life, was working hard for Pharaoh. And so, but they've conveniently forgotten this because they are so desperate for food and water, and they're not trusting God in this point. So Moses is like, what am I going to do with you? We did all this. And so Moses goes to God, and he says, God, what am I going to do? These people are so angry. They don't have food or water. They want to kill me, because they're so mad about it, and they're grumbling, and they're complaining about it. And thankfully, God is very patient. God is a patient God, and very patient with us when we complain and we grumble about things. And so God said, tell the people, I'm going to provide food for them. Because God can do that, right? He can provide food for 1 million people in the middle of a desert. So God said, tell the people that in the morning, there will be bread, and in the evening, there will be meat. And they should gather just as much as they need for the day, no more, no less. And that's how much they should take. And Moses said, okay. And he went to the people and they told them that. And the next morning, when they got up, it looked like, the Bible says it looked like there was dew all over the ground. Dew is like water covering the ground. So a little layer of like water kind of over the ground. And when it dried up, there was bread. Probably looked something like this. This is called matzah. But back then, it said it tastes kind of like honey. So kind of like honey bread, kind of sweet and tasty. Sounds pretty yummy. And it was called manna. They called it manna, which actually means, what is this? Because they didn't know what it was. They'd never seen it before. It was bread provided by God. And so God provided manna for the Israelites in the morning. And so they were told to go out and collect a certain amount, just what everybody needed in the morning, and eat that throughout the day. And then at night, God sent quail. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a quail. It's kind of a short little bird. It runs along the ground. Usually they travel in bunches. Probably called something other than bunches, but I don't know what that is. So God sent manna in the morning and quail at night, and they were to take exactly what they needed to eat, no more, no less. They shouldn't carry any of it over to the next day, because the next day God would provide exactly what they needed. So the people went out and they gathered what they needed, and they ate it, and some of them didn't obey God. Some of them thought, well, I don't know if God's going to provide tomorrow, even though he just provided today. And so I'm going to hold on to some, and I'm going to keep it till the next day. And the next day, when they woke up and they looked at the stuff they had saved, it said it had all gotten rotted, and been eaten by worms. And so it was no good to eat. It was pretty disgusting. So God was like, I told you, only take exactly what you need, and I will provide for you the next day. So thankfully, again, God is very patient and was very patient with these people who took a long time to learn this lesson. So every morning, the people would go out and they would gather their manna, just enough for the day, and then in the evening, they would gather their quail, just enough for them to eat that night, and then the next day, they'd do it all over again. Except for the sixth day. So we have a week, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days. On the sixth day, the day before the Sabbath, Sunday, well, back then it was Saturday, but the day before the Sabbath, God said, you're going to take twice as much as you need, and you are going to keep it overnight. It will be fine overnight, and then you don't have to go out and gather on the Sabbath. You will just eat whatever you gathered the day before. So you gathered enough for that day, and then enough for the Sabbath, and then you don't have to go out and work on the Sabbath. And so you can keep the Sabbath day holy, just like God told them to. So the people did that. They gathered their double. Hopefully they remembered to gather their double on the sixth day. And then on the seventh day, some of them still didn't learn, and they went out to go look for manna in the morning, and there was no manna, and there was no quail in the evening. And again, God was like, when are you going to learn? I've said what I've said. You've got to trust me. Exactly what I said I'm going to do, I'm going to do. There's going to be no manna and no quail on the Sabbath day, and you need to collect extra the day before. So the people learned this valuable lesson that God was providing for them, and that he would give them exactly what they needed, no more, no less, and that they needed to trust in him. And this is a lesson that took them a very long time to learn, I'm afraid. Later on, we'll learn exactly what happened, but God kept them in the desert for 40 years. 40 years. And you know what they ate during those whole 40 years? Manna and quail. That's all they had to eat for 40 years. I haven't even lived 40 years. I can't even imagine spending my whole life eating manna and quail and manna and quail and manna and quail again and again and again. But that's what they did. That's what they did for those 40 years they were in the desert. And they were learning to trust God and to know that he would provide for them and that he had a plan for them. And they needed to learn some other lessons while they were there. And we'll talk about that next week. We'll talk about why they spent 40 years in the desert. And we'll talk about what they're going to do after the desert. But we'll talk about that next week. But today, just remember that God provides for us. He gives us exactly what we need. And even when times are tough right now, it seems like we can't do everything we want to do right now. We can't go out or we can't play with friends. Just remember that God is providing for us, and he has given us exactly what we need. We have food, we have water, we have houses to stay in, we have our family with us, and we don't need anything else than that. So maybe now is a time for us to just learn more about God and focus more about Him and remember the things He has given us and be thankful for the things He has given us. And maybe be thankful that we're not stuck in a desert eating manna and quail every day, because that would be pretty boring. I would miss my pizza and ice cream and salads and all those other yummy things that we get to eat nowadays. So maybe our lesson today is be thankful for what we have and try not to grumble or complain about the things we can't do right now, and remember that God is good and that He has provided us with things right now. Miss you guys. Hope you enjoyed this lesson. We'll see you again next week. Bye.